It's been vilified for the last century, but what if I told you nicotine actually has a ton of unique medicinal properties? A recent study showed that nicotine can reverse the signs of aging and improve metabolism. They found that low doses of nicotine administered could enhance mitochondrial function, improve markers like SIRT1, which is considered a longevity gene, and increase the levels of NAD, which is a molecule that declines as we age. And it restored the levels of these things back to youthful levels. They also found that nicotine could protect the telomeres that are at the end of your chromosomes or your DNA, and it also prevented against oxidative stress. These are both key hallmarks of the aging process, yet nicotine was shown to reverse them. The older animals that consumed the nicotine also had improved cognitive function as they aged. In fact, nicotine is a well-known cognitive enhancer. Around 7 milligrams in this study was shown to boost the brain's metabolism by around 30%, and it could also restore memory and improve the learning process. This study was done in Alzheimer's disease patients, and the reason for that is because Alzheimer's disease, there's known to be this dysfunction in what's called the cholinergic system, which is the system that uses the neurotransmitter acetylcholine in your brain. Well, acetylcholine has receptors that are called nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, and those are the receptors that nicotine acts on, and it's able to confer these cognitive benefits. Nicotine actually has a ton of cognitive benefits. It improves memory, learning, it improves focus. At around 5 to 10 milligrams of nicotine, people show better reaction times and improved scores on cognitive tests. And when nicotine binds to these nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, or when the cholinergic system is activated, it does a few key things. One of the most important is that it can boost your dopamine. So essentially you have neurons that output choline onto neurons that output dopamine. And when there's enough acetylcholine or cholinergic input into those neurons, then they pump out more dopamine. This also raises the metabolic rate of the brain, so the brain's using more energy. And it also supports a process called long-term potentiation, which is basically a form of neuroplasticity that engrooves neural pathways in your brain and enforces memory. Older studies have shown that the more cigarettes that people would smoke, the lower their incidence of Alzheimer's dementia. In this paper here, they showed that 21 cigarettes a day was associated with the lowest risk of Alzheimer's disease. Nicotine has other actions that are preventative for Alzheimer's disease as well. It can decrease the secretion of the amyloid beta peptides, which are the peptides that make up those plaques that you hear about in your brain. Nicotine can also chelate copper, and while copper is an essential nutrient, it can also in excess contribute to oxidative stress, which is basically the damaging of your cells and your tissues. If you take a look at these pictures here, you'll see that when administered nicotine, there's less aggregation or there's less clumping up of these amyloid beta peptides. People who smoke cigarettes also have a lower risk of ulcerative colitis, which is an inflammatory bowel disease. And this should really come as no surprise considering that nicotine has a number of interesting anti-inflammatory benefits, especially in the gut. In this paper, nicotine was used to reduce digestive symptoms in this type of gut inflammation, and it preserved the overall structure of the gut while lowering the output of inflammatory cytokines. This was a clinical study done with 17 milligrams of nicotine a day, and it improved many of these symptoms of ulcerative colitis. That includes stool frequency, abdominal pain, fecal urgency, as well as the actual structure of the intestines. And that's because those same nicotinic cholinergic receptors that we talked about in the brain also exist in the gut and in immune cells. When this receptor is activated on immune cells, it tends to lower the output of these inflammatory mediators. It tends to calm them down. This can also help prevent leaky gut, so it essentially upregulates the amount of the tight junction proteins that are secreted from your gut cells. This makes sure that the gut lining is sealed and healthy and it's not permeable. And aside from working directly on immune cells to lower inflammation, there's also something called the cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway, and this is something mediated by your vagus nerve, which is one of the predominant parasympathetic nerves in your body, and it uses acetylcholine or cholinergics in order to transmit that signal. The vagus nerve connects to the spleen, and the spleen is where a lot of these immune cells are hosted and where they mature. And when there's this acetylcholine input into the spleen, it tends to calm down a lot of these immune cells and the inflammation. Now, nicotine is awesome for lowering inflammation and improving your metabolism, but it probably won't be the only thing that you need in order to optimize your health. And for that, I definitely suggest coming to us at Prism, where we can help you out with a personalized approach to your health. We've served nearly 500 clients. Over 94% of our clients who stick with us experience improvements in at least one symptom. We do lab testing, we do one-on-one coaching, we do extensive reports, anything you can want to get you the absolute best possible care. Just click the link here or in the description below, book a free call, and we'll get you started as soon as possible. When nicotine acts on these receptors in the nervous system of your digestive tract, it can upregulate the motility of your gut as well, which is very important if you want to prevent digestive disorders. Owing to nicotine's anti-inflammatory benefits, one very interesting study showed that nicotine could reverse myocarditis. And as I'm sure you know by now, myocarditis is this inflammation, and it can even turn into fibrosis of the heart. However, giving nicotine can prevent a lot of the damage to the heart. And that's again because of the activation of the nicotinic receptors on these immune cells. Another study here showed that nicotine could improve survival rates in myocarditis. It also reduced the fibrosis as well as the cardiac damage and the inflammation that ensues. Another very dangerous inflammatory condition is sepsis, which is basically when bacteria start to leak into your bloodstream. And this drives massive amounts of inflammation. It shuts down your mitochondria, your metabolism, and it can kill you. However, administering nicotine during sepsis can once again improve survival, again by lowering inflammation. Nicotine even reduces inflammation in your skin, the type that gives you sunburn. In this study, they gave people transdermal nicotine and showed that their skin was less damaged in response to UV light as well as other irritants. The anti-inflammatory benefits of nicotine even extend into things like autoimmune conditions. For instance, in MS, nicotine is shown experimentally to have some benefit and preserve the myelin sheath, which causes this disease. And some studies have even shown that nicotine can reduce things like allergies. And that's because the mast cells that pump out histamine also have nicotinic acetylcholine receptors and once again respond to nicotine. Outside of just reducing inflammation, nicotine has some benefits for your metabolism. As we mentioned before, nicotine can be used as a fat loss tool as it increases the total metabolic rate. In this study showing that 5 milligrams of nicotine per day could reduce fat gain. So then why has nicotine been demonized for so long? Really, I think it comes down to the route of administration. Things like cigarettes and vaping and chewing tobacco, these can be bad for your health in a lot of different ways, but the nicotine itself is probably the healthiest thing about these things for you. This is why in a lot of these studies, they're administering nicotine as a transdermal patch to exclude any effects from any of these other additives in things like cigarettes. There are also some instances when nicotine can act as a pro-inflammatory agent. We talked a little bit before about ulcerative colitis, but in Crohn's disease, it appears to have the opposite effect. And for things like gum inflammation, nicotine is not going to be of help. It can actually be an inflammatory trigger there. When used in excess, it can also stimulate adrenaline and different stress hormones. And this can contribute to a host of different issues like anxiety or trouble sleeping. But if you're using nicotine safely in these low doses and you're using it in a proper administration method, then I don't really see there being many issues here. And if you guys want to actually measure your inflammation, your inflammatory markers in your blood, or measure your metabolic markers without a doctor at a discount, you can go through Revelation Diagnostics, which is our lab testing company. Just click the link here, use code ANALYZE for 10% off. But with that all being said, that's going to wrap it up for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next one.